Hello and welcome to this tutorial. Today I will be going over pivot tables on Excel 2010. A pivot table is a very powerful tool in Excel that is used to summarize large sets of data based on the user's needs. I will show you how to create a pivot table and some of the things you can do with them. Okay, so to create a pivot table, you must have a dataset such as the one presented here. You also need to ensure your dataset is complete with headers, that there are no blank cells within your dataset, and that your dataset is surrounded by blank cells. So if you have something like this here, you need to either move it or delete it. So I'm going to go ahead and delete it. And so let's begin. And all you need to do is select any cell within your dataset and go to the Insert tab and click on Pivot Table. Excel will automatically detect and select the entire dataset for you. Here, Excel is giving us the option to save the pivot table to the existing worksheet or a new worksheet. So let's go ahead and hit OK to create our pivot table on a new worksheet. So our pivot table is now created here on the left, but as you can see, it is blank as we need to use this pivot table field list window to populate it based on our needs. Up here, you can see all the headers from our dataset, and they each contain all of the information for that respective field. Down here, we have 4 different windows, which is what we will actually use to populate our pivot table. The way you populate the table is by dragging the headers down to either the column labels, row labels, or values window. You can also click on the check marks here, but I prefer to drag to make sure I'm populating my table exactly the way I want it. We also have this report filter window, and I will go over that briefly. But for now, let's get started on some reports. Okay, so I will create 3 different reports so you get a basic understanding of how this works. In this first report, I simply want to display the amount of sales for each territory. We can do that easily by dragging region down to our row labels and sales down to our values. We can also drag our region over to the column labels window if we wanted our report to display like this. But I prefer having our region in our row labels window, so let me go back to that. And so we are done with this first report. But before moving on to our second report, I want to point out some formatting considerations. The first is our number format, and we can easily change it by right-clicking on any cell containing our sales data and hitting Value Field Settings. Next, hit Number Format and select any number format you wish to use. We hit OK, and you can see that the number format for our entire sales data is updated. Another formatting consideration is getting rid of this ugly row labels header. We can do this by going up to Design, and under Report Layout, we click on Show in Tabular Form. As you can see, this gives us a proper header name. Okay, so let's move on to our second report, and suppose we now want to display sales for every region for each respective sales rep. Now there are multiple ways to do that depending on how you choose to populate your table. First, let me clear our first report, and we do that by unchecking these check marks. And to get started on our second report, we are going to drag sales rep down to our row labels, region down to our column labels, and sales down to our values. We can again change the number format, and we are done with our second report. Now suppose we want a third report, and for this report we want to display monthly unit sales for each region. So let me clear our second report, and to get started on our third report, I will drag our date down to our row labels, region down to our column labels, and units sold down to our values. As you can see, we now have the unit sales listed by the date of the sale for every region. But remember that we want to display monthly totals. To accomplish this, let's right-click on any cell containing a date, and we click on Group. Here you can see that you can group by seconds, minutes, hours, days, months, quarters, and years. We want to group by months, so let's just hit OK. And there you have it. Okay, so let's format our numbers like in our previous examples. And this is units sold. And we are done with our third report. Okay, so now let me show you some of the ways you can filter your pivot table. You can filter your pivot table using the report filter window down here. Just drag down any field you want to filter by. In this case, let's drag the sales rep field down to our report filter window. And now you can see this report filter option on top of our worksheet. Let's click on it. And you can see that we can now filter our current report for any given sales rep that we choose. We can also click on this Select Multiple Items checkbox to select multiple employees. Okay, so now let me get rid of this to show you another very effective way to filter your pivot table. And that way is by inserting a slicer. The way this works is simply by going up to the Options tab and clicking on Insert Slicer. We will have the option to insert a slicer for any field that we want to be able to filter by. In this example, let's click on Sales Rep and Region. And what will happen is that we now have these neat little controllers, and by clicking on any of the fields in the controller, we can filter our data in practically any way imaginable. We can filter by unit sales in the East, by Annie, unit sales in the East and West, by Annie and Daisy, and so on and so forth. Okay, so the last thing I want to go over is how to update your pivot table when your data set changes. Before I do that, let me make a simple report showing unit sales by sales rep. So I will get rid of these. Unit sales by sales rep. Okay, and so if we only make changes to our original data set, such as making a change to one of our unit sales figures, all we have to do in our pivot table is hit refresh under the Options tab. So let's make a change to one of our unit sales figures from our original data set. Notice sum of units sold under Daisy are equal to 98.34 here. But suppose this last entry is incorrect. Suppose Daisy here did not sell 800 units. She actually sold 900 units. So let's make the correction. And let's go back to our pivot table. And you'll notice that unit sales under Daisy have not changed. However, all we have to do is hit the refresh button. And now you can see the updated unit sales number. Now, suppose you are actually making an addition to your original data set. Suppose we left out an entry late in the year for a new employee named Jake. So let's go ahead and make that entry. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this last entry and change the name to Jake. Now let's go back to our pivot table, hit refresh, and as you can see, there is still no Jake. The reason for that is because we need to first change our data source. And the way you do that is by clicking on Change Data Source under Options. So let's click on that. And now let's select the entire data set, including Jake's entry. I'm holding down the Control and Shift keys here. We hit Enter. And now when we go back to our pivot table, you can see that Jake now shows up in our report. The reason this is important is because suppose you spend a really long time formatting your pivot table, formatting the numbers, adding a cool pivot table style, and so we do not want to have to start all over from scratch in case of an addition. Having the ability to refresh our pivot table for changes or additions is a very useful feature. Okay, well, that is going to be it for this tutorial. I hope you've gained some very useful information to help you create your very own pivot tables. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Thank you for watching.